Hello everybody and welcome to the Winecast. I'm not quite ready to cast on another entire wine region, but I still want to keep things Italian, so I thought I'd take a stab at a remarkable, but sadly underappreciated style of Italian wine, the traditional method sparkler from Lombardia, Franciacorta. Before I start, though, I want to plug my latest venture onto social media, and that would be Facebook. I've created a page on that platform that I hope to be using as a means to communicate more easily with my followers, as well as to share articles, news, and other information that I come across in my research that I think you'll find interesting. So if you're on Facebook, I hope you'll point your search field in my direction and look for the Unknown Winecaster page. And I hope to connect with you there, as well as here on YouTube. And now, back to Franciacorta. Like I said a moment ago, Franciacorta is a traditional method sparkling wine, and I'm assuming that you have some familiarity with what's involved in the traditional method and what makes it unique. But if that's not the case, feel free to check out my dedicated cast on the subject. This particular traditional method sparkler is made in the Lombardy or Lombardia region of northern Italy, specifically in the province of Brescia in that region, south and southeast of the Lago di Seo, or Lake Iseo, about 40 miles or so from Milan. Within the zone for this appellation, 19 villages or communes are authorized to produce Franciacorta, with perhaps the two best known being Adro and Erbusco. The origin of the name Franciacorta is obscure, and though it looks like it might have something to do with France, any connection there is likely to be pretty oblique, with the most likely origin being from the medieval Latin phrase curtis francae, that means something like courts that are free of obligations, specifically tax obligations, and probably refers to concessions given to Benedictine monasteries and to the communities that house them, exempting them from various local taxes and tariffs. Exemptions like that would date from the Middle Ages, and speaking of this region's history, the production of still wine here goes back for centuries, but this region's connection to sparkling winemaking is more recent, beginning in the 1950s when a young and adventuresome winemaker named Franco Ziliani, working for a local estate, got permission to experiment with making sparkling wines in the traditional method. In 1961, the first of these experimental wines was bottled, made mostly from Pinot Blanc, or in Italian, Pinot Bianco, and given the name Pinot di Franciacorta. In 1967, a DOC was awarded to the region that covered both the production of still and sparkling wines, and in 1995, the region's sparkling wines were elevated to their own DOCG. Still wines continued to be produced here under the Terre di Franciacorta DOC until 2008, when the name for the DOC was changed to Curte Franca to help distinguish still wine production in the region from sparkling wine production. There are currently 3 grape varieties authorized for making Franciacorta, though that number is in the process of transitioning to 4. Chardonnay, that makes up about 80% of the region's plantings, is the top grape, followed by Pinot Noir, or in Italian, Pinot Nero, that takes up about 15% of vineyard land, while the remaining 5% is taken up, more or less, by Pinot Bianco. An indigenous grape, Yerba Mate, has been authorized for use in Franciacorta as of the 2017 vintage, and it will be allowed to make up to 10% of the blend in wines that are driven by Chardonnay and Pinot Nero, and up to as much as 50% of the blend in wines dominated by Pinot Bianco. Another member of the Pinot collective, Pinot Grigio or Pinot Gris, was also a permitted grape, but its use was phased out starting in the mid-1990s. Of the 3 main permitted grapes, Pinot Bianco is considered the least noble of the group and is only allowed to make up 50% at most of any given blend, and is very rare in most Franciacortas given its limited plantings in the area as a whole. Franciacorta is produced in a number of quality levels, each keyed to aging, particularly and unsurprisingly for a traditional method sparkler, to aging on the lees or dead yeast cells from the second in the bottle fermentation. The regulations for aging Franciacorta show a particular commitment to long sur-lie aging, as indicated in this chart that compares minimum requirements for time on the lees in Franciacorta to the minimums for Europe's 2 other famous traditional method sparklers, Champagne and Cava. Though, in the case of all 3 sparkling wines, quality-minded producers often age beyond the required minimums. The minimums for Franciacorta are generally the longest in the EU, with 18 months on the lees required for the standard spumante non-vintage style, 30 months for the vintage bottlings, and a whopping and unparalleled 60 months for the reservas. In addition to the non-vintage, vintage, and reserva bottlings, there are 2 other styles that should be mentioned. First, SATÈN, a Blanc de Blanc expression, that is, a white wine made exclusively from authorized white grapes, meaning only Chardonnay and Pinot Bianco, as the newly authorized grape Herba Mate has not been approved for this style. A hallmark of this style of Franciacorta is that the pressure in the finished bottle is kept low, deliberately under 5 atmospheres of pressure, or just a bit under what a typical traditional method sparkler would have, making the wine gentler and silkier on the palate, and, fun fact, the name SATÈN means something like silk in the local dialect. The standard non-vintage expression of this style is aged on the lees for a minimum of 24 months, and this style is available in vintage and reserva bottlings as well, with the corresponding minimums for lees aging. I ran into a bit of controversy when researching the requirements for Franciacorta rosés, with the curriculum I'm currently studying, the Italian Wine Scholar curriculum, giving a minimum requirement of 25% Pinot Nero or Pinot Noir for a rosé, while other sources, including the website for the Franciacorta Consortium that creates the regulations for this wine, giving a 35% minimum requirement. The discrepancy between the sources might be attributable to ongoing changes in the regulations, since elsewhere on the consortium's website I found the requirement given as 25%. So the regulations may be in flux at this moment. Whatever the case, if you're preparing for a certification, follow the number given by your curriculum. Chardonnay and Pinot Bianco can be used in Franciacorta rosés too, as can Herba Mate, at least starting in 2017, and then up to 10% of the blend. Like SATÈN, standard non-vintage rosés have to age for 24 months, and they can also be bottled as vintage or reservas with the corresponding minimums for lees aging. Franciacortas use a scale identical to that used by Champagne and Cava to indicate sweetness from dosage, but for reasons that we'll see in a second, there's no doux or sweet category, which would be for wines with more than 50 grams per liter sugar, and certain styles can only be sweetened by dosage to certain degrees. While the standard non-vintage spumante can be sweetened across the entire spectrum from an unsweetened nature dosage to a demi-sec, vintage bottlings can only be sweetened to the extra dry level, while reservas can only receive dosages that leave them at the nature extra brut or brut levels, and SATèNs can only be bruts. So what are Franciacortas like in terms of their character? Well, the climate in Franciacorta is fairly described as continental, with a relatively warm growing season that lets the grapes there get riper than they would usually get in a place like, say, Champagne. Riper grapes lead to wines that have a richer fruit profile, and the increased ripeness moderates acid levels in these wines, and that means that sweetness from the dosage isn't as necessary here as it is in Champagne to tame the wine's high acid. So styles that are lower in dosage work well for Franciacortas. Also, the area's commitment to long lees aging tends to result in wines with a unique and distinct richness and full-bodied quality that sets them apart from other traditional method sparklers. And in general, Franciacorta has been critically acclaimed as perhaps Italy's greatest region for sparkling wine, even though some other, more famous areas tend to get all of the press. So these wines are definitely wines that should be on your radar if you're serious about sparkling wines. Thanks for joining me for another Winecast. I hope to cast on another entire Italian wine region soon, and even though I'm all about Italy at the moment, please don't hesitate to keep sending me suggestions and requests, because I do like to change things up, even when I'm very focused on a particular part of the wine world. I hope you enjoyed this cast, and if it was helpful and interesting to you, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and please keep leaving comments, questions, or just your thoughts. And, like I mentioned earlier, I hope I do run into you on my new Facebook page. I'm your host, The Unknown Winecaster, and I'm out. Enjoy the grape, but always enjoy it responsibly.